There's nothing quite like coming home to find your life has moved on without you. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we discover when we think we still control everything. Eleanor Burke built the biggest ranch in New Mexico back in the 1880s. She was tough as leather and twice as stubborn. After years away chasing bigger deals, she comes home expecting to find her ranch waiting. Instead, she finds Silas, the man she once owned and freed, playing with a little girl outside her house. He's laughing and spinning her through the air like any loving father would. The child's joy fills the air with pure happiness. What Eleanor doesn't know is that this little girl is her own daughter, born while she was gone. How did the man she barely saw as human become the father she never was? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The leather riding gloves lay crumpled on the wagon seat beside Eleanor Burke, worn thin from decades of gripping reins and ranch work. They had been her father's once, then hers, a symbol of the Burke family's dominion over 30,000 acres of New Mexico territory. Now they felt foreign in her weathered hands, like everything else about this homecoming. Eleanor pulled her coat tighter against the desert wind as her hired wagon creaked along the familiar dirt road. The driver, a weathered Mexican man named Carlos, had recognized her name when she'd paid him in Santa Fe, but his eyes had held questions he was too polite to ask. Where had the great Eleanor Burke been these past 4 years? Why was she returning alone, with nothing but a single trunk and a carpet bag? She couldn't tell him what she barely admitted to herself, that she was coming home because she had nowhere else to go. The Burke Ranch stretched before them like a memory made real. Rolling hills dotted with mesquite and juniper trees, crossed by streams that had never run dry, even in the worst drought years. This land had been everything to her father, and then everything to her. She had fought for every acre, buying out smaller ranches, negotiating with territorial officials, standing toe-to-toe with men who thought a woman had no business running cattle. "Senora Burke," Carlos said softly, "we are close now, yes?" Eleanor nodded, her throat tight with an emotion she couldn't name. The main house came into view around a bend, a sprawling adobe structure with thick walls and deep porches, built to withstand both the harsh desert sun and the occasional Apache raid. Her father had designed it himself back in 1854, when he'd first claimed this land with nothing but determination and a Winchester rifle. But something was wrong with the picture. The house looked cared for. The adobe walls had been recently patched and whitewashed. The wooden shutters hung straight on their hinges. The garden that had always been Maria's pride showed neat rows of vegetables and herbs, thriving despite the late autumn season. Eleanor had expected abandonment. She had prepared herself for broken windows, a collapsed porch, cattle scattered to the four winds. Instead, she saw a home that looked more loved than it had when she'd left. "Stop here," she told Carlos, her voice barely above a whisper. That's when she saw them. A tall black man stood in the yard beside the house, his powerful frame silhouetted against the setting sun. In his massive hands he held a little girl, perhaps 4 or 5 years old, spinning her through the air while she shrieked with laughter. The sound carried across the evening air like music, pure and joyful and utterly foreign to Eleanor's experience. The man was Silas. She recognized him immediately, though 4 years and freedom had changed him. He stood straighter now, moved with confidence rather than the careful deference she remembered. His clothes were clean and well-mended, his hair neatly trimmed. This was not the broken man she had reluctantly freed when the war ended, and she could no longer legally keep slaves. The child in his arms was a mystery. Eleanor felt something cold settle in her stomach as she watched Silas set the girl down and ruffle her dark hair with obvious affection. The girl looked up at him with complete trust, chattering in a voice too distant for Eleanor to make out words. Where had this child come from? And why was Silas, her former slave, the man she had freed with barely a goodbye, caring for her as if she were his own daughter? Eleanor's mind raced back to that day in 1865. The war had ended, Lincoln was dead, and the territorial governor had made it clear that all slaves in New Mexico were to be freed immediately. Eleanor had called Silas to her study, this same house that seemed so different now, and handed him papers she'd had drawn up by a lawyer in Santa Fe. "You're free," she had told him, the words tasting strange in her mouth. "I've got your papers here. You can go wherever you want." Silas had stood there, hat in his hands, his dark eyes unreadable. He was well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry a yearling calf, but in that moment he had seemed smaller somehow. Lost. "Where would I go, Miss Eleanor?" he had asked. She hadn't had an answer for him then. She had expected him to pack his few belongings and disappear, maybe head north to Colorado or west to California like so many other freed slaves. Instead, he had asked if he could stay on as a paid hand. The arrangement had lasted only a few months before Eleanor left for what she told everyone would be a brief business trip to Denver. She had bigger plans then, plans to buy railroad land in Colorado, to expand the Burke empire beyond anything her father had imagined. The ranch would be waiting when she returned, probably in 6 months, maybe a year at most. That had been 4 years ago. 4 years of failed investments, broken partnerships, and slowly dwindling resources. 4 years of telling herself she was building something greater, while everything she touched turned to dust in her hands. 4 years of avoiding the truth that she missed this place, missed the rhythm of ranch life, the satisfaction of hard work, the sound of cattle moving across open range, and now she was back, with empty pockets and wounded pride, to find that life had continued without her. "Senora?" Carlos asked gently. "Should I drive to the house?" Eleanor shook her head. "Wait here a moment." She needed time to think, to understand what she was seeing. Silas had apparently not only stayed, but had somehow acquired a child. The implications made her head spin. Had he married? Found a widow with a daughter? The possibility hadn't occurred to her. In her mind, Silas had remained frozen in time, waiting for her return like everything else on the ranch, but clearly everything else had not been waiting as she watched. An older Mexican woman emerged from the house. Even at this distance, Eleanor recognized Maria Santos, the housekeeper who had been with the Burke family for over 20 years. Maria called out something in Spanish, and Silas nodded, lifting the child to his shoulders and walking toward the house. The scene was achingly domestic, heartbreakingly normal. A father bringing his daughter in for supper, a housekeeper preparing the evening meal, a family settling in for the night. It was everything Eleanor had never had, everything she had been too busy building an empire to appreciate. The child's laughter echoed one more time across the yard before the door closed behind them, leaving Eleanor alone with the desert wind and the weight of 4 years of mistakes. She thought of the deed to the ranch, folded in her carpet bag with the rest of her important papers. That deed bore her name, made her the legal owner of every building, every acre, every head of cattle on the property. But ownership, she was beginning to realize, might not be the same thing as belonging. "Drive to the house, Carlos," she said finally. "It's time I went home." But as the wagon rolled forward, Eleanor Burke wondered if home would have her back, or if she was about to become a stranger in the place she had built with her own 2 hands. The wooden doll sat on the porch steps like a sentinel, its simple carved face painted with careful detail. Eleanor noticed it immediately as Carlos helped her down from the wagon. A child's toy, lovingly crafted from what looked like cottonwood, with a tiny dress sewn from scraps of blue calico. It was the kind of gift a father might carve for his daughter during long winter evenings, whittling by firelight while she slept. Eleanor's boots echoed on the wooden porch as she approached the front door. The sound felt too loud in the evening quiet, announcing her presence like a gunshot. Through the windows, she could see warm lamplight and movement, the ordinary bustle of a family preparing for dinner. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. This had been her house, her domain, her kingdom. She had never needed permission to enter before, but something about the scene she had witnessed, Silas and the child, their easy laughter, their obvious belonging, made her feel like an intruder. Before she could decide, The door opened. Maria Santos stood in the doorway, her lined face a map of surprise, joy, and something that might have been worry. She was older than Eleanor remembered, her black hair now streaked with silver, but her dark eyes held the same warmth that had comforted a young Eleanor through childhood's scraped knees and adolescent heartbreak. "Dios mio," Maria whispered, crossing herself. "Eleanor, you have come home." The words should have been welcoming, but something in Maria's tone suggested they were more complicated than that. Eleanor heard footsteps behind the housekeeper, and then Silas appeared in the doorway. He had grown into his freedom, Eleanor realized. His posture was straight, his gaze direct. When he had been her slave, he had always looked past her, never quite meeting her eyes. Now he looked at her fully, and she found herself fighting the urge to look away. "Miss Eleanor," he said simply. His voice was deeper than she remembered, more assured. "We didn't know you were coming." "I sent no word," Eleanor replied, surprised by how formal she sounded. "I wanted to see how the ranch was faring." An awkward silence stretched between them, filled by the sound of the desert wind and the distant lowing of cattle. Eleanor found herself studying Silas's face, looking for the man she remembered, the quiet, careful person who had mended fences and broken horses and accepted her rare words of praise with a nod and downcast eyes. This man seemed like a stranger wearing a familiar face. "Papa." A small voice called from inside the house. "Who's at the door?" Eleanor's heart stopped. The child appeared beside Silas, peering around his long legs with curious dark eyes. She was beautiful. Mixed heritage, Eleanor could see now, with Silas's strong features softened by someone else's delicate bone structure. Her hair hung in two neat braids, and her small dress was clean and carefully mended, but it was the word that struck Eleanor like a physical blow. "Papa." The child had called Silas Papa. "This is Miss Eleanor," Silas said gently, placing a protective hand on the child's shoulder. "She owns this ranch. She's been away for a while." The child, she couldn't be more than 4 years old, studied Eleanor with the frank curiosity of childhood. "Are you the lady in the picture?" she asked. "What picture?" Eleanor managed to ask. "The one Papa keeps on the mantel." "Mama Maria says you built this whole place." Eleanor's eyes found Maria's, searching for answers. The housekeeper's expression was carefully neutral, but Eleanor had known her too long to miss the tension around her eyes. "Ruby," Maria said gently, "why don't you go wash your hands for supper?" "The grown-ups need to talk, Ruby." Even her name was perfect, bright and precious, exactly the kind of name Eleanor might have chosen if she had ever thought about children, which she hadn't. Because children were complications, and Eleanor Burke had never had time for complications. The child obeyed, but not before giving Eleanor one more curious look. As she disappeared into the house, Eleanor felt the weight of 2 adult gazes settling on her. "Perhaps we should sit," Maria suggested, gesturing to the porch chairs that Eleanor didn't remember being there before. "Carlos, would you like some coffee before you head back to town?" The wagon driver had been waiting patiently, but he shook his head. "I should return before dark, Senora. The moon is not full tonight." Eleanor paid him and watched the wagon disappear down the road, taking with it her last connection to the outside world. When she turned back, Silas and Maria were waiting, their faces grave. "The child," Eleanor said without preamble. "Where did she come from?" Maria and Silas exchanged a look that spoke of long conversations and shared secrets. Eleanor felt a stab of something she didn't want to name. Jealousy, perhaps. That these two people who had served her family had built a relationship that excluded her entirely. "Eleanor," Maria said carefully. "Ruby is your daughter." The words hit Eleanor like a slap. She sank into one of the porch chairs, her legs suddenly unsteady. "That's impossible. Do you remember Dr. Samuel Crawford?" Maria asked gently. "The territorial judge who came through in the spring of '82. Eleanor remembered. Sam Crawford, tall, handsome, educated, with plans to run for territorial governor. They had spent 3 passionate weeks together before he continued on to Santa Fe. He had promised to write, to return, to send for her when his political career was established. The letters had come for a few months, then stopped. She had learned later that he had married a senator's daughter in Washington. You left 2 months after he did, Maria continued. You didn't know. Eleanor's mind reeled. A daughter. She had a daughter, a living, breathing child who called another man Papa and looked at Eleanor like a stranger. The implications crashed over her like a flash flood. 4 years of Ruby's life. 4 years of first words and first steps and childhood milestones that Eleanor had missed entirely. Why didn't you write to me? Eleanor asked, her voice barely audible. We didn't know where you were, Silas said quietly. You said you'd be back in 6 months. When Ruby was born and you still hadn't returned, we sent letters to Denver, but they came back undelivered. Eleanor remembered her boarding house in Denver, the shabby room where she had spent her first failed months chasing railroad investments. She had moved 6 times in 4 years, always one step ahead of creditors or toward the next promising opportunity. No wonder their letters had never found her. She was a difficult birth, Maria added. We almost lost her twice in the first month. Silas sat up with her every night for weeks, feeding her goat's milk when my own milk wouldn't come. Eleanor looked at Silas, trying to reconcile this image with the man she remembered. You saved her life. We all did, he said simply. She's a good child. Bright, curious, loves the horses. The casual pride in his voice undid something in Eleanor's chest. This man, this former slave she had freed with barely a thought, had raised her daughter, loved her, been the father Eleanor hadn't even known Ruby needed. She doesn't know, Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. We were waiting, Maria said. Hoping you would come back. We didn't know how to explain where her mama had gone. Eleanor stared at the wooden doll on the porch steps, a father's love carved into cottonwood, painted with care and given with joy. Everything she had built, all her grand plans and ambitious dreams, seemed suddenly hollow compared to that simple toy. I need time to think, Eleanor said, standing abruptly. I'll stay in town tonight. Eleanor, Maria said gently, this is your home. But as Eleanor walked back toward the road, leaving her trunk on the porch like an abandoned promise, she wondered if that was true anymore. Home was where a child called you Mama, where your presence was needed and wanted and woven into the fabric of daily life. Home was what she had given up without even knowing she was losing it. Silas kept his freedom papers in a wooden box on the mantel, next to the daguerreotype of Eleanor's father and a small tin type of Ruby as a baby. Eleanor discovered this 3 days later when she finally returned to the ranch. Having spent 2 nights in the town's single boarding house, staring at water-stained ceiling and trying to make sense of her shattered world, the papers were yellowed now, creased from handling, but still bore her signature in faded ink. She had signed them hastily, eager to be done with the uncomfortable necessity of freeing a man she had never really seen as property anyway. Now, looking at how carefully Silas had preserved them, she understood that those papers meant something entirely different to him than they had to her. He reads them sometimes, Maria said quietly from the kitchen doorway. Eleanor hadn't heard her approach, but Maria had always moved like smoke through the house, especially on difficult days. I think they remind him who he is now. Eleanor replaced the papers carefully in their box. And who is that? A free man, a father, someone who belongs somewhere. The words stung because they highlighted everything Eleanor had never been. She had owned this ranch, commanded its workers, built its reputation across 3 territories. But she had never belonged anywhere except behind a desk with ledgers and land deeds spread before her. Ruby appeared in the kitchen doorway, half hidden behind Maria's skirts. For 3 days, the child had watched Eleanor with the careful curiosity of a wild animal, interested but ready to flee at the first wrong movement. Is that lady staying for breakfast? Ruby asked Maria, as if Eleanor couldn't hear her. This lady has a name, Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice gentle. It's Eleanor. And yes, I'm staying for breakfast. Ruby considered this information seriously. Papa makes better pancakes than Mama Maria. Ruby, Maria scolded, but she was trying not to smile. It's true, the child insisted. Here's our Fluffier. But don't tell Mama Maria I said that. Eleanor felt something warm uncurl in her chest, the first genuine emotion she had experienced since returning home that wasn't grief or confusion. "Your secret is safe with me." That earned her a shy smile before Ruby disappeared back into the kitchen. Eleanor spent the morning reacquainting herself with the ranch, and everywhere she looked, she found evidence of Silas's careful stewardship. The cattle were healthy and well-fed, the fences mended and straight, the equipment clean and properly stored. In the barn, she discovered a dozen horses she didn't recognize, good stock, well-trained, with the Burke brand burned into their flanks. "I bought them from a ranch in Colorado," Silas explained when she asked. He had appeared silently at her shoulder, the way he always had when they worked together years ago. "The owner was selling out. Got them for a good price, trained them myself." "With what money?" Eleanor asked, then immediately regretted the sharp tone. But she genuinely didn't understand how a man with no resources could have expanded her herd. "The ranch has been profitable," Silas said simply. "I kept detailed books. You can look at them whenever you want." The offer was made without defensiveness, but Eleanor heard the underlying message. He had nothing to hide, had done nothing wrong. He had simply been a better steward of her property than she had been of her own life. "I'd like to see the books," she said. That afternoon, Silas spread 4 years' worth of ledgers across the kitchen table. Eleanor had expected rough records, basic notations of cattle sold and supplies purchased. Instead, she found meticulous accounting that would have impressed any bank examiner. Every penny accounted for, every transaction documented, every profit carefully reinvested in improvements. "You've been saving money," she observed, running her finger down a column of figures. "For Ruby's future," Silas said. "For education when she's old enough. There's a school in Santa Fe that takes children regardless of their parentage." Eleanor looked up sharply. "Regardless of their parentage? She's a mixed child, Miss Eleanor. There aren't many places that will accept her as she is." The casual way he said it, the matter-of-fact acknowledgement of a reality Eleanor had never considered, made her stomach clench. Ruby was her daughter, but also a child who would face obstacles Eleanor had never imagined. And Silas had been planning for those obstacles, saving money and researching schools, while Eleanor had been in Denver, losing her inheritance on foolish investments. "There's something else," Silas said, pulling out a different ledger. "About the ranch's legal status." Eleanor frowned. "What do you mean?" "The territorial office has been asking questions. About taxes, about who's been running operations. I've been paying the property taxes from ranch funds, but they want to know where the legal owner has been." The words hit Eleanor like cold water. In her 4 years of self-imposed exile, she had never considered the legal ramifications of abandoning her property. She had assumed the ranch would simply wait for her return, frozen in time like a fairy tale castle. "What kind of questions?" she asked. "The kind that could lead to seizure for abandonment," Silas said quietly. "I've been representing myself as your foreman, but there are limits to what authority that carries." Eleanor stared at the numbers on the page, but they blurred together as the implications sank in. She could lose the ranch, not to creditors or failed investments, but to her own negligence. Everything her father had built, everything she had fought to expand, could be gone because she had been too proud and too stubborn to come home. "How long do we have?" she asked. "The next assessment is in 3 months. If you're not here to sign the documents personally, they could begin seizure proceedings." Eleanor closed the ledger with hands that trembled slightly. 3 months to prove she belonged here, to convince bureaucrats that she was a responsible landowner worthy of keeping 30,000 acres of prime grazing land. 3 months to learn how to be a mother to a daughter who barely knew her name. 3 months to figure out how to work alongside a man who had saved everything she cared. But while she was busy losing everything, she thought she wanted Silas, she said finally. "I owe you an apology." He looked up from the papers, surprise flickering across his features. "I left you here with no instruction, no authority, no guarantee that I would ever return. You could have taken Ruby and gone anywhere, started a new life. Instead, you stayed and saved everything I was too foolish to protect myself. This was her home, Silas said simply. Ruby belongs here. And you? Eleanor asked. Do you belong here? For a long moment, Silas didn't answer. Then he looked toward the kitchen, where they could hear Ruby chattering to Maria about the kittens in the barn. I belong wherever she is, he said. The rest we'll figure out as we go. The makeshift saddle Silas had carved for Ruby sat in the barn like a work of art. Eleanor discovered it on her fourth morning back, when she went looking for her old riding gear and found instead this testament to patient craftsmanship. The leather was soft and supple, the wooden frame perfectly proportioned for a small child, every edge sanded smooth to prevent injury. Tiny silver conchos decorated the pommel, not expensive ones, but carefully polished pieces that caught the morning light streaming through the barn doors. Papa made it special for me, Ruby said from behind her. Eleanor turned to find the child standing in the barn doorway, already dressed in tiny boots and a split skirt that looked like a miniature version of Eleanor's own riding clothes. He says I'm ready for a real horse now, not just the old pony. Eleanor remembered her own first real saddle, the one her father had surprised her with on her 8th birthday. It had been store-bought from Santa Fe, expensive leather worked by professional craftsmen. But it hadn't been made with half the love evident in every stitch of Ruby's saddle. Would you like to go riding this morning? Eleanor asked, the words coming out before she had time to think them through. Ruby's face lit up like sunrise. Really? Papa usually takes me, but he's fixing the windmill today. Really? Eleanor confirmed, surprised by how much Ruby's enthusiasm warmed her. But first let me see how you handle your horse. What followed was a revelation. Ruby was a natural horsewoman, sitting the saddle with confidence and guiding her mare, a gentle paint named Rosie, with hands that were light but sure. She had Silas's patience and what Eleanor hoped might be her own instinctive understanding of horses. Papa taught me to read the horse's ears, Ruby explained as they rode toward the south pasture. See how Rosie's ears are forward? That means she's curious about something. When they go back flat, that's when you need to be careful. Eleanor found herself studying her daughter's profile as they rode. Ruby had Sam Crawford's aristocratic nose and delicate chin, but her hands on the reins and the way she sat her horse were pure Burke. Eleanor felt a strange pride mixed with regret. Pride that her daughter had inherited the family's gift with horses. Regret that she hadn't been here to nurture that gift herself. Tell me about Papa, Eleanor said carefully, as they let the horses graze near a stream. What's he like? Ruby considered the question with the seriousness of childhood. He's the best papa in the world, she said finally. He tells good stories, and he never gets angry when I make mistakes. Sometimes he gets sad, though. Sad about what? I don't know. But Mama Maria says it's because he misses someone who went away. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. Had Silas been grieving for her all these years? The possibility seemed absurd. She had been his owner, not his friend. Certainly not someone worth missing. But Ruby's words suggested a depth of feeling that Eleanor had never suspected. He taught me to read, Ruby continued, clearly proud of this accomplishment. And to write my name. And he knows all about the stars. Did you know there's a river of stars across the sky? Papa showed me. Each revelation was another small knife to Eleanor's heart. All the firsts she had missed, all the moments of wonder and discovery that a parent was meant to share. Silas had been there for all of it, patiently teaching and nurturing, while Eleanor chased dreams that had turned to dust in her hands. They rode back to the house as the sun reached its zenith, Ruby chattering about the cattle they had seen and the hawks circling overhead. Eleanor found herself relaxing for the first time since her return, caught up in her daughter's boundless curiosity about the world around her. But the peace shattered when they reached the yard and found 3 men waiting on the porch. Eleanor recognized the type immediately, territorial officials with their city clothes and superior attitudes. They stood when they saw her approaching, their faces grave. Miss Eleanor Burke. The tallest one asked. Yes, Eleanor replied, dismounting and helping Ruby down from her horse. I'm James Morrison, territorial assessor. These are my associates, Mr. Patterson and Mr. Wells. We need to discuss the status of your property." Eleanor felt Ruby press closer to her side, picking up on the tension even if she didn't understand its source. "What about my property?" "There have been questions raised about abandonment," Morrison said. "Property left unattended for more than 3 years is subject to territorial review." "The property hasn't been unattended," Eleanor said sharply. "I've had a foreman managing operations." "A Negro foreman," Patterson interjected, his tone making the words sound distasteful. "Without legal authority to act on your behalf." Eleanor felt anger flare in her chest. "Silas has managed this ranch better than—" "Papa!" Ruby suddenly cried out, and Eleanor turned to see Silas approaching from the direction of the windmill. His clothes were dusty from work, his sleeves rolled up, and he moved with the confident stride of a man comfortable on his own land. But Eleanor saw how his posture changed when he spotted the officials, becoming more guarded, more careful. "Gentlemen," he said politely, removing his hat, "you're the one who's been running operations." Morrison asked, "Yes, sir." "With Miss Eleanor's permission." "Permission granted 4 years ago," Wells said, consulting a sheaf of papers. "Before you disappeared, Miss Burke." "I didn't disappear," Eleanor said coldly. "I was conducting business in Colorado. For 4 years." Patterson's skepticism was obvious. "Without any communication with territorial authorities?" Eleanor realized how weak her position was. These men had the power to take everything, the ranch, the cattle, the home Ruby had always known. And they clearly had little respect for either a woman who had abandoned her responsibilities or the black man who had filled the void she left behind. "The ranch has been profitable and well maintained," Eleanor said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The taxes have been paid, the livestock properly managed." "I fail to see the problem." "The problem," Morrison said, "is legal precedent. We can't have property owners simply walking away from their obligations and expecting everything to be waiting when they decide to return." Ruby tugged on Eleanor's skirt. "Mama Eleanor," she whispered, "are the bad men going to take our house?" The innocent question hung in the air like an accusation. These men weren't just threatening Eleanor's property, they were threatening Ruby's home, the only place she had ever known. They were threatening to separate her from the father who had raised her, the man who carved her saddles and taught her about stars. Eleanor looked at Silas, saw the quiet resignation in his eyes. He expected to lose this place, she realized. He had always expected that someday his luck would run out, that the precarious life he had built would be swept away by forces beyond his control. But Eleanor Burke had never accepted defeat gracefully. And she wasn't about to start now. "Gentlemen," she said, lifting her chin with the authority she had inherited from 3 generations of Burke ranchers, "I think you should see the books before you make any decisions about this property." Eleanor's old business letters lay scattered across her bedroom floor like fallen leaves, each one a testament to failed ambition and dwindling resources. She had finally found the courage to unpack her trunk completely, and the contents told the story of 4 years spent chasing shadows while losing substance. Letters from banks in Denver, demanding payment on loans secured by properties that had turned out to be worthless. Correspondence with railroad investors who had vanished overnight, taking her money with them. Legal documents from creditors in Colorado who were still pursuing judgments against her. The sum total of her grand adventure was debts totaling nearly $8,000, more than the ranch earned in 2 good years. She heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly gathered the papers, stuffing them back into the trunk. But when she looked up, Silas stood in the doorway, holding a cup of coffee and wearing an expression of quiet concern. "Maria sent this up," he said, setting the cup on her dresser. "She thought you might need it." Eleanor realized she had been sitting on the floor for over an hour, lost in the magnitude of her failures. The territorial officials had left after examining the books, apparently impressed by Silas's meticulous record-keeping. But they had made it clear that further questions would be raised if Eleanor disappeared again. "Silas," she said, not looking at him, "I need to tell you something." He settled into the chair by her window, patient as always. Eleanor had forgotten this about him, his ability to wait, to listen without judgment. It was a quality she had never possessed herself. "I'm ruined," she said simply. "The business ventures I left here to pursue, they all failed. I owe money to people in 3 states, and I have no way to pay them back." If Silas was surprised, he didn't show it. "How much?" he asked. "Nearly $8,000. A long silence stretched between them. $8,000 was a fortune, more than most people saw in a lifetime, certainly more than a former slave could ever hope to earn. "That's why you came back," Silas said finally. "It wasn't a question." "Yes," Eleanor admitted. "I had nowhere else to go. I was living in a boarding house in Denver, selling off everything I owned just to eat. When the last of my money ran out, I sold my jewelry to buy a ticket home." She expected judgment, disapproval, perhaps even satisfaction that the proud Eleanor Burke had been brought so low. Instead, Silas asked, "What do they want?" "The creditors? Payment in full, or they'll pursue legal action. Some of them already have." Eleanor pulled out a court document with an official seal. "This is a judgment against me from a bank in Colorado. If they can prove I own property in New Mexico, they can seize it to satisfy the debt." Silas studied the paper, his brow furrowed. Eleanor had taught him to read years ago, not out of kindness, but because literate slaves were more valuable. Now she watched him puzzle through the legal language, realizing that her decision to educate him might be the only thing standing between her family and complete ruin. "They don't know about the ranch yet," he said. "No. But it's only a matter of time. Legal judgment's a public record. Some lawyer will eventually realize that Eleanor Burke of Colorado is the same. Eleanor Burke, who owns 30,000 acres in New Mexico." A sound from downstairs interrupted them. "Rubies!" Laughter mixed with Maria's voice. The sound of a normal afternoon in a home where a child felt safe and loved. Eleanor felt her chest tighten as she realized what her failures might cost Ruby. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Ruby's sick." Silas went very still. "What do you mean?" "This morning when we came back from riding," she was flushed, running a fever. "Maria's with her now, but—" Eleanor's voice caught. "What if it's serious? What if she needs a doctor, real medicine?" "I don't have money for any of that." Eleanor had discovered Ruby's illness when they returned from their confrontation with the territorial officials. The child had been drooping in her saddle during the last mile home, and when Eleanor helped her down, Ruby's forehead had been burning with fever. "She's been pushing herself too hard," Maria had said, taking charge with the calm efficiency of someone who had raised children. "Trying to impress you, I think. She'll be fine with rest and willow bark tea." But Eleanor had seen the worry in Maria's eyes, the way she hovered over Ruby's bed, checking and rechecking her temperature. And Eleanor had felt the cold grip of panic, the realization that she was helpless to protect her own daughter. Silas stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the pasture where Ruby's horse grazed peacefully. "She's strong," he said finally, "like her mother." "Which mother?" Eleanor asked bitterly. "The one who ran away, or the one who couldn't even manage that properly?" "The one who rode out this morning to show her daughter the ranch," Silas said, turning back to her. "The one who's here now, when Ruby needs her." Eleanor felt tears threaten, the first she had allowed herself since returning home. "I don't know how to be her mother, Silas. I don't know how to be anything anymore." To her surprise, Silas sat down on the floor beside her, close enough that she could smell the honest scent of hard work and desert air that always seemed to cling to him. "You think I knew how to be her father?" he asked quietly. "When Maria handed me that squalling baby and said her mama wasn't coming back any time soon, I'd never held a child in my life. Didn't know the first thing about feeding or changing or any of it." Eleanor looked at him in surprise. "But you're so natural with her. Now maybe. But those first months—" Silas shook his head. "I was terrified every minute. Afraid I'd drop her or feed her wrong or not notice when she was sick. Maria had to teach me everything. What changed?" Eleanor asked. "Time," Silas said simply. And realizing that loving her was more important than being perfect at it, Eleanor thought about Ruby's fever, her flushed cheeks and listless movements. about the creditors who could take away the only home her daughter had ever known, about the territorial officials who saw Silas as unfit to manage property and Eleanor as an irresponsible owner. "I need to check on her," Eleanor said, starting to rise. Silas caught her hand gently. "Eleanor," he said, "about the money, the debts. There might be a way." She looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "I've been saving. For Ruby's future, like I told you. But also," he hesitated, "I've been saving to buy the ranch." Eleanor stared at him. "Buy the ranch? If you ever decided not to come back, if something happened to you, I wanted to make sure Ruby would always have a home." Silas met her eyes steadily. "I have $3,000 saved. It's not enough to cover all your debts, but it might be enough to keep the creditors at bay while we figure out a permanent solution." The offer hit Eleanor like a physical blow. $3,000, money Silas had earned through years of careful management and sacrifice, saved penny by penny while she squandered her inheritance on foolish dreams. Money he was willing to give up to save the ranch that legally belonged to her. "I can't take your savings," she whispered. "It's not just for you," Silas said. "It's for Ruby, for all of us. This is her home too." From downstairs came the sound of Ruby coughing, weak but not desperate. Maria's voice followed, gentle and soothing, the voice of someone who had cared for countless children through countless illnesses. Eleanor realized that Silas was right. This wasn't just about her pride or her failures anymore. This was about a little girl who deserved to grow up safe and loved in the place where she belonged. 3,000 would buy us time, Eleanor said slowly. "But not a solution." "Then we find a solution together," Silas replied. "You and me and Maria and Ruby, as a family." The word hung between them, full of possibilities Eleanor had never dared to imagine. The family Bible sat heavy in Eleanor's lap, its leather binding worn smooth by generations of Burke hands. She had found it on the shelf in her father's old study, exactly where it had always been. And now she traced the gold lettering on its cover while Ruby recovered from her fever in the room upstairs. 3 days had passed since Ruby fell ill. 3 days of Maria's gentle nursing and Silas's quiet vigilance. The fever had broken that morning, leaving Ruby weak but alert, demanding to know when she could go back to the horses. Eleanor had spent those 3 days learning what it meant to worry about someone more than herself, watching for signs of improvement, listening for changes in Ruby's breathing, discovering that parental love was equal parts joy and terror. "Mama Eleanor," Ruby called from upstairs, her voice still hoarse but stronger than it had been. "Will you read to me?" Eleanor climbed the stairs with the Bible in her hands, surprised by how much pleasure she found in that simple request. Ruby was propped up in bed, surrounded by the toys and books that filled her room, evidence of Silas's attention to her happiness and development. "What would you like me to read?" Eleanor asked, settling into the chair beside Ruby's bed. "The part about families," Ruby said. "Papa sometimes reads it when I have bad dreams." Eleanor opened the Bible to the front pages, where births and deaths had been recorded in careful script for 3 generations. She found her own birth listed in her father's precise handwriting, Eleanor Marie Burke. Born October 15, 1825. Below it, added in different ink and a shakier hand, was another entry, Ruby Catherine Burke, born March 3, 1883. "Look," Eleanor said softly, showing Ruby the page. "Your name is here too." Ruby studied the writing with the intense concentration of a child learning to read. "Papa wrote that," she said proudly. "He said every family needs to remember its history." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. Silas had claimed Ruby as a Burke, had written her into the family record as if he had every right to do so. The gesture spoke of a sense of belonging that Eleanor envied. Silas seemed to understand family in ways that had always eluded her. "Tell me about your dreams," Eleanor said, closing the Bible and giving Ruby her full attention. "The ones that wake you up." Ruby fidgeted with her blanket, suddenly shy. "Sometimes I dream about being lost. Like I'm in a place where nobody knows my name, and I can't find Papa or Mama Maria." Eleanor felt a stab of recognition. How many times had she felt lost in Denver? surrounded by strangers who saw her only as an opportunity or an obstacle. How many nights had she lain awake in unfamiliar beds, wondering if anyone would notice if she simply disappeared? "Those are scary dreams," Eleanor acknowledged. "But you know what? You're not lost. You're right here in your own room, in your own home, with people who love you." "Papa says the same thing," Ruby said, brightening. "He says home isn't just a place. It's the people who care about you." Eleanor thought about that as she sat with Ruby through the afternoon. Silas had created something here that Eleanor was only beginning to understand. Not just a household, but a family bound together by choice rather than blood, by love rather than obligation. When Ruby finally dozed off, Eleanor found Silas in the barn, working on a broken bridle by lamplight. The familiar sight brought back memories of evenings when she was young, when her father would work late into the night maintaining equipment while she did her lessons at the kitchen table. "She's better," Eleanor said, settling onto a hay bale nearby. "I know," Silas replied without looking up from his work. "Maria said her fever broke clean this morning. She'll be back to pestering the horses by tomorrow." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of horses settling for the night. Eleanor found herself studying Silas in the lamplight, noting the grey threads in his hair that hadn't been there when she left, the lines around his eyes that spoke of years of worry and responsibility. "Tell me about when she was born," Eleanor said suddenly. Silas's hand stilled on the leather. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. I want to know what I missed." For a long moment, Eleanor thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down the bridle and looked at her directly. "It was a hard birth," he said quietly. "Maria did her best, but she's not a doctor. Ruby came early and small, and for the first few weeks we weren't sure she would make it." Eleanor closed her eyes, imagining her daughter fighting for life while she was hundreds of miles away, oblivious to the drama unfolding in her absence. "I used to sit with her at night," Silas continued, "feed her with a spoon when she wouldn't take the bottle. Maria said talking to babies helps them grow. So I told her stories about the ranch, about the horses, about her grandfather who built this place with his own hands." "What kind of stories?" Eleanor asked. "True ones, mostly. About the time your father faced down 10 Apache raiders with nothing but a Winchester and pure stubbornness. About the year the river flooded, and he saved half the herd by swimming them to higher ground. About how he met your mother at a dance in Santa Fe and knew within 5 minutes that he was going to marry her." Eleanor was surprised. "I never heard that story. He told it to me once when we were working late during a difficult calving season. Said he wanted Ruby to know she came from people who didn't give up when things got hard." The words hit Eleanor with unexpected force. Her father had shared family stories with Silas, stories he had never told her, stories that had become part of Ruby's heritage through Silas's careful preservation. "He thought of you as family," Eleanor said, the realization dawning slowly. "Even then, before the war ended, before you were legally free, he saw you as part of this place." Silas picked up the bridle again, running the leather through his fingers. "Your father was a good man, fair. He never treated me like property, even when the law said that's what I was." Eleanor thought about the freedom papers Silas kept so carefully, about the way he had written Ruby's name in the family Bible, about his patient care through Ruby's illness. She began to see a pattern. Silas had always belonged here, had always been family. She was the one who had never understood what that meant. "Silas," she said carefully, "what you said about buying the ranch, were you serious? About having the money?" "Yes, I've been careful with every penny." "No, I mean about wanting to own it, to make it yours." Silas was quiet for so long that Eleanor wondered if she had overstepped. Then he said, "I used to dream about owning land. When I was young, before I understood what slavery really meant. I thought maybe someday I could have a place of my own, a place where nobody could tell me to leave. And now I know it's not about the papers that say you own something. It's about the place that owns you." Silas gestured around the barn, encompassing the ranch beyond. "This place owns me, Miss Eleanor. Ruby owns me. The idea of protecting them, of making sure they're safe, that owns me too. Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of knots she hadn't known she was carrying. What if we owned it together? She heard herself ask. Silas looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean a partnership. Legal and binding. Your money and my land working together to build something better than either of us could manage alone. The idea had come to her suddenly, but as she spoke it aloud, it felt right in a way that surprised her. Not charity, not obligation, but a genuine partnership between equals. The creditors might still come, Silas pointed out. Then we face them together. All of us, you, me, Maria, Ruby, as a family. Silas studied her face in the lamplight, searching for something she hoped he would find. Finally, he nodded. Partners, he said. Extending his hand, Eleanor took it, feeling the calluses that matched her own. The strength that had sustained everything she loved, while she was busy losing everything she thought she wanted. Partners, she agreed. The hidden will lay beneath a loose floorboard in her father's study, wrapped in oiled cloth and forgotten for 20 years. Eleanor discovered it by accident while searching for additional legal documents to support their partnership agreement. She had been looking for the original ranch survey maps when her foot caught on a board that shifted under her weight. Eleanor knelt and pried up the plank, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth, were papers that made her hands tremble as she read them. The first document was a will, dated 1863, 2 years before the war ended, 2 years before she had freed Silas. Her father's familiar handwriting covered 3 pages of legal paper, witnessed and notarized according to territorial law. But it was the contents that made Eleanor sink into his old chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. I, Thomas Burke, being of sound mind and body, do hereby set down my true intentions regarding the man known as Silas Freeman, currently held in bondage upon my ranch. Freeman. Silas Freeman, not Silas Burke as she had always assumed, but Silas Freeman, a free man's name that told a story Eleanor was only beginning to understand. She read on, her heart pounding. Let it be known that the man Silas Freeman came to my employ in the year 1859 as a free man seeking work. Due to the political climate and the danger posed to free blacks traveling in the territory, I agreed to provide him with false papers identifying him as my property. For his own protection and safety. Eleanor's vision blurred. Silas had never been a slave, never been property. Her father had created a fiction to protect a free man from the violence that often met blacks traveling alone in the territories. But there was more. In exchange for his labor and his agreement to maintain this deception, I have paid Silas Freeman wages according to the standard rate for ranch foremen, said wages to be held in trust until such time as it becomes safe for him to reclaim his true identity. Eleanor flipped through the remaining pages, finding account records in her father's meticulous handwriting. 20 years of wages, carefully tracked and invested. The final entry, dated just weeks before her father's death, showed a balance that made Eleanor gasp. $12,000 plus interest. $12,000. More than enough to satisfy her creditors and secure the ranch's future. Money that legally belonged to Silas, that had always belonged to him. Eleanor sat in the gathering darkness of the study, her mind reeling with the implications. Every order she had given him, every assumption she had made about his place in their household, every moment of superiority she had felt, all of it based on a lie she had been too young and too self-absorbed to question. Footsteps in the hallway announced someone's approach. Eleanor quickly gathered the papers as Silas appeared in the doorway, carrying a lamp. "Maria sent me to fetch you for supper," he said. "She was worried when you didn't come to the kitchen." Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the freed slave she had always believed him to be, but a man who had spent 20 years protecting a fiction that kept him safe while enriching the family that claimed to own him. "Silas," she said quietly, "I need to show you something." She spread the documents on her father's desk and watched his face as he read them. The lamplight flickered across his features, revealing surprise, then understanding, then something that might have been relief. "You knew," Eleanor said. "It wasn't a question." "I suspected," Silas replied, setting down the papers with careful hands. "Your father was too fair, too respectful. Real slaveholders don't ask their property for opinions about crop rotation or listen when they suggest improvements to the herd. But you never said anything. Even after the war, even when I gave you those freedom papers, what was I supposed to say?" Silas asked. "That you were freeing a man who was never enslaved. That your father had been paying me wages you knew nothing about. That every assumption you'd made about your family's wealth was built on a lie." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "So you let me go on believing—" "I let you go on being Eleanor Burke, proud daughter of a successful rancher," Silas interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "The truth would have destroyed everything you thought you knew about your father, about yourself. I couldn't do that to a 22-year-old girl who had just lost the only family she'd ever known." The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. 20 years of deception, maintained not for his benefit but for hers. 20 years of allowing her to believe she was his superior while he quietly managed the ranch and protected her inheritance. "The money," Eleanor said weakly. $12,000 belongs to me, Silas confirmed. "Your father was honest in his business dealings, even when they were unconventional." Eleanor thought about her creditors, about the territorial officials who questioned her right to own the ranch, about Ruby's future and the partnership she had offered just days earlier. $12,000 would solve everything if Silas chose to share it. "What do you want to do?" she asked. Silas walked to the window, staring out at the ranch he had helped build and maintain for 2 decades. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of revelations and possibilities. "I've been thinking about that since Ruby was born," he said finally. "About what it means to be free, to own something, to have a place in the world. And freedom isn't about papers or money or even land," Silas said, turning back to her. "It's about choosing where you belong and who you belong with." Eleanor waited, afraid to hope, afraid to assume she understood what he meant. "I choose here," Silas continued. "I choose this ranch, this life, Ruby's future. I choose the partnership you offered, but as equals, true equals, with everything that implies—" Eleanor felt tears threaten for the second time since returning home. "Even after everything, even knowing that I lived my whole life believing a lie about who you were?" "Especially then," Silas said, "because it means we can start over. No more pretense, no more assumptions. Just 2 people who love the same place and the same child, working together to build something lasting." Eleanor picked up the will, holding it carefully. "This changes everything. The ranch, the money, our legal standing, it changes the details," Silas agreed. "But the important things stay the same. Ruby still needs parents who love her. The ranch still needs people who understand it. We still need each other." From the kitchen came the sound of Ruby's laughter, fully recovered from her illness, and apparently charming Maria with some story about the barn cats. The sound anchored Eleanor to the present, to the life that was possible if she could find the courage to embrace it. "Partners," she said, extending her hand to Silas, as she had 3 nights earlier. "True partners this time." "Partners," Silas agreed, taking her hand. In everything, Eleanor looked down at the hidden will, at 20 years of careful accounts and patient investment. Her father had been wiser than she'd ever imagined, protecting Silas while building wealth that would secure all their futures. The deception had been born of love and necessity, maintained by loyalty and sacrifice. Now it was time to build something new on the foundation of truth they had finally uncovered. "There's one more thing," Eleanor said, picking up the account ledger. "According to this, the ranch has been profitable enough to pay Silas's wages and still show a profit. That means the ranch operation is worth more than anyone realized," Silas finished, "including those territorial officials who questioned whether it was being properly managed." Eleanor smiled, feeling something like her old confidence returning. "I think Mr. Morrison and his associates are going to be very surprised when they see these books. along with any creditors who think they can seize abandoned property, Silas added. For the first time since returning home, Eleanor felt truly hopeful about the future, not because her problems were solved, but because she finally understood she didn't have to solve them alone. The Burke Ranch had always been more than land and cattle and buildings. It was a place where people chose to belong to each other, where family was built on love rather than blood, where the past could be rewritten by those brave enough to claim a different future. Eleanor Burke was finally ready to come home. The original ranch survey map spread across the kitchen table like a promise, its faded lines and careful notations telling the story of 3 decades of patient expansion. Eleanor traced the boundaries with her finger, while Silas sat across from her, the hidden will and account ledgers arranged between them like weapons in an approaching battle. Your father was strategic, Silas observed, pointing to a section along the eastern border. See how he acquired these parcels? Each one controls access to water. Without them, the surrounding land is worthless for grazing. Eleanor studied the map with new eyes, seeing not just property lines, but evidence of her father's long-term vision. Every purchase had been calculated, every negotiation designed to strengthen their position. The Burke Ranch wasn't just large, it was strategically impregnable. The creditors don't understand what they're trying to seize, she realized. They see 30,000 acres and think in terms of raw land value. They don't see the water rights, the strategic positioning, the infrastructure, or the fact that we can prove 20 years of profitable operation under expert management, Silas added, tapping the account ledgers. These records show steady growth, careful investment, responsible stewardship. No court is going to hand that over to creditors from Colorado. Eleanor felt a familiar thrill, the same excitement she used to experience when negotiating a difficult cattle sale or outmaneuvering a competitor. But this time, the stakes were personal, not just business, but home, family, the life Ruby deserved to inherit. A knock at the door interrupted their planning. Maria appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, but Eleanor was already rising. Through the window, she could see riders approaching, 3 men in dark suits, moving with the grim purpose of officials on unpleasant business. Creditors, Eleanor said grimly. They found me faster than I expected. Silas began gathering the papers, but Eleanor stopped him with a gesture. No, leave them out. It's time these people understood what they're dealing with. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Eleanor walked to the door with her shoulders straight and her chin high, drawing on 3 generations of Burke confidence. When she opened it, she found herself facing a thin man with calculating eyes and 2 companions who looked like hired muscle. Miss Eleanor Burke? The thin man asked. Yes, I'm Harrison Blackwood, representing Denver Mercantile Bank. These are my associates, Mr. Crane and Mr. Walsh. We have a legal judgment against you in the amount of $4,200 plus interest and court costs. Eleanor stepped aside, gesturing them into the house. Please come in. I've been expecting you. Blackwood seemed surprised by her calm reception, but he followed her into the kitchen, where Silas waited. Eleanor saw the creditor's eyes take in the scene. The surveyor's map, the neat stacks of ledgers, the evidence of careful record-keeping and financial planning. This is my business partner, Silas Freeman, Eleanor said, noting how Blackwood's expression shifted at the introduction. We were just reviewing our financial position, partner. Blackwood asked, clearly skeptical. Legal partner, Silas confirmed, his voice steady and confident. Equal partnership, filed with the territorial court last week. Eleanor felt a surge of pride at the way Silas presented himself, not as a former slave or hired hand, but as a successful businessman discussing matters of mutual concern. The hidden will had changed more than their legal status. It had freed them both from the weight of false assumptions. I see, Blackwood said, though his tone suggested he didn't see at all. Well, regardless of any recent business arrangements, Miss Burke's debts predate. My debts are personal, Eleanor interrupted. They have no bearing on the ranch operation, which has been profitable and well managed throughout the period in question. Blackwood pulled out a folder of papers. According to our investigation, you abandoned your Colorado business interests and disappeared for several months. That suggests financial irresponsibility and possible intent to defraud creditors. I returned home to manage family business, Eleanor replied calmly. As these records will show, that decision was financially sound. She gestured to the ledgers, watching Blackwood's eyes widen as he took in the scope of documentation. Silas had prepared for this moment, she realized. Every record was perfectly organized, every transaction clearly documented, every profit and loss carefully calculated. These are impressive, Blackwood admitted reluctantly, but they don't change the fact that you owe Denver Mercantile a substantial sum. Actually, they do, Silas said, opening one of the ledgers to a specific page. These records show that the ranch operation has been profitable enough to generate significant savings over the past 4 years. Savings that are more than adequate to satisfy Miss Burke's obligations. Blackwood leaned forward, studying the figures. Eleanor watched his expression change as he realized what he was seeing, not the desperate scramble of a debtor trying to avoid responsibility, but the careful financial planning of successful business partners. You have $12,000 in savings. Blackwood asked. We have various assets and investments, Eleanor replied carefully. The exact details are private business matters. From upstairs came the sound of Ruby's voice, reading aloud to Maria. The domestic normalcy of it, a child practicing her letters while the adults discussed business, seemed to underscore everything they were fighting to protect. There's something else you should know, Eleanor continued. The territorial government has been reviewing property ownership in this region. They're particularly interested in operations that demonstrate long-term stability and community investment. It was a calculated bluff, but Eleanor saw it hit home. Blackwood and his associates were outsiders, representatives of distant institutions with no stake in the local community. They were exactly the kind of people territorial officials viewed with suspicion. What does that mean? Crane asked, speaking for the first time. It means that attempts by outside creditors to seize productive local property are viewed unfavorably, Silas explained, especially when those properties are owned and operated by established community members with spotless reputations. Eleanor bit back a smile. Silas was stretching the truth, but his confident delivery made it sound like established fact. More importantly, it was the kind of truth that could become reality if they played their cards correctly. Blackwood studied the map again, clearly recalculating his position. Even so, a legal judgment is a legal judgment. Miss Burke signed promissory notes, accepted loans, which she is prepared to honor, Eleanor interrupted. But on reasonable terms, through negotiated settlement rather than seizure proceedings that would benefit no one. The room fell silent, except for the steady tick of the mantel clock and Ruby's voice from upstairs, now chattering to Maria about something she had seen in the barn. Eleanor felt the weight of the moment, not just the financial implications, but the future she and Silas were trying to build together. What kind of settlement? Blackwood asked finally. Eleanor and Silas exchanged a look. They had anticipated this question, had spent hours planning their response. The hidden will gave them leverage, but they needed to use it carefully. Payment in full over 18 months, Eleanor said, secured by ranch assets and guaranteed by our partnership agreement. You'll receive your money, plus reasonable interest, and we maintain operational control of a profitable business. 18 months is a long time, Walsh objected. 18 months is nothing compared to the years you'd spend in court trying to seize property that's legally protected and practically worthless to outsiders, Silas countered. You don't know this land, don't understand the water rights, don't have the relationships necessary to make it profitable. Take the settlement. Eleanor watched Blackwood calculate, seeing the moment when business pragmatism overcame personal vindictiveness. He had come here expecting to intimidate a desperate woman into immediate payment or property seizure. Instead, he found organized, confident business partners offering a reasonable solution to a complex problem. I'll need to consult with my principals, Blackwood said finally. Of course, Eleanor replied. You're welcome to stay in town tonight. We can meet again tomorrow morning to finalize the details. As the creditors prepared to leave, Ruby appeared at the bottom of the stairs, drawn by the sound of unfamiliar voices. She looked between the adults with the perceptive eyes of a child who understood that something important was happening. Papa, she said to Silas, are these the men who want to take our house? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Eleanor saw Blackwood's discomfort, the way his eyes avoided Ruby's direct gaze. It was one thing to pursue abstract legal remedies against distant debtors. It was another to look a child in the face and explain why her home might be taken away. No, sweetheart, Silas said gently. These are businessmen who came to discuss some financial matters with your mama, Eleanor. Everything is going to be fine. Ruby nodded solemnly, then surprised everyone by walking directly to Eleanor and taking her hand. Mama Eleanor is very smart about business, she announced. Papa told me so. Eleanor felt her heart swell with pride and protectiveness. This child, her daughter, their daughter, trusted her to solve the problems that threatened their security. More than that, Ruby saw her as part of the family worth defending. Yes, she is, Silas agreed, his voice warm with affection. Very smart indeed. After the creditors left, Eleanor and Silas sat on the porch, watching the sun set over their land. Tomorrow would bring more negotiations, more challenges, more tests of the partnership they were building. But tonight, they had time to appreciate what they were fighting for. Do you think they'll accept the settlement? Eleanor asked. They'll accept it, Silas replied confidently. Men like that understand profit and loss better than principle. We offered them a solution that serves their interests. Eleanor nodded, feeling more hopeful than she had in years. Not because the path ahead was easy, but because she finally understood she didn't have to walk it alone. Eleanor's grandfather's pocket watch ticked steadily in her palm as she waited outside the territorial courthouse in Santa Fe. The gold case was warm from her nervous handling. Its familiar weight, a connection to the Burke family legacy that had brought her to this moment. Inside the courthouse, a territorial judge would decide whether the settlement agreement she and Silas had negotiated would be legally binding. Blackwood and his associates had spent the night reconsidering their position, and by morning they had agreed to the 18-month payment plan. But they had insisted on judicial oversight, wanting official guarantee that the arrangement would be honored. Eleanor had agreed, confident in their legal position, but nervous about putting their fate in the hands of a stranger. You ready for this? Silas asked, joining her on the courthouse steps. Eleanor looked at him, noting how he had dressed for the occasion. Clean white shirt, black suit coat, his best boots polished to a shine. He looked like what he was, a successful businessman prepared to defend his interests in court. As ready as anyone can be, Eleanor replied, slipping the watch back into her pocket. Do you have the partnership papers? Silas patted his jacket. Right here, along with the account ledgers and your father's will. Everything we need to prove our case. They climbed the courthouse steps together, their footsteps echoing in the marble hallway. Eleanor felt the weight of history in this building, territorial law being written, land disputes settled, the future of New Mexico, being shaped by men in black robes who might never have worked a day on the land they governed. Judge Morrison, no relation to the territorial. Assessor who had visited the ranch, presided over a courtroom that smelled of old wood and legal precedent. He was an older man with shrewd eyes and a reputation for fairness. Though Eleanor knew that fairness to a territorial judge might not include much consideration for the rights of a black man. Regardless of his legal status, Blackwood presented his case first, outlining Eleanor's debts and the bank's right to pursue collection. His arguments were methodical and legally sound, painting a picture of irresponsible borrowing and attempted evasion. Eleanor listened calmly, knowing that his facts were correct even if his interpretation was incomplete. Your Honor, Blackwood concluded, while we're willing to accept the proposed settlement terms, we request court oversight to ensure compliance. Miss Burke's history suggests a pattern of financial irresponsibility that requires legal supervision. Judge Morrison nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Eleanor. Miss Burke, you may present your response. Eleanor rose, feeling the eyes of everyone in the courtroom. Blackwood and his men, the court clerk, a handful of local lawyers who had come to observe. But it was Silas's steady presence beside her that gave her confidence. Your Honor, she began, Mr. Blackwood is correct that I made poor investment decisions in Colorado. I won't deny that, or attempt to minimize the obligations those decisions created. But what he fails to understand is the context that led to those decisions, and the assets that now secure my ability to honor them. She gestured to Silas, who rose and placed the ledgers on the table before them. These records document 4 years of ranch operations during my absence from New Mexico. As you can see, the property has been not only maintained, but improved, generating consistent profits under the management of my business partner, Mr. Silas Freeman. Judge Morrison raised an eyebrow at the formal introduction, but his expression remained neutral as he began examining the ledgers. Mr. Freeman, Eleanor continued, is not simply an employee or agent, but a full legal partner in the ranch operation. Our partnership was formalized last week and registered with this court. I see that, Judge Morrison said, studying the partnership documents. This is an unusual arrangement, Miss Burke. Yes, Your Honor, but a sound one. Mr. Freeman has proven his business acumen through results. The ranch is more profitable now than it was when I left 4 years ago. Eleanor felt her confidence growing as she spoke. This was what she had always been good at, presenting facts, making arguments, convincing skeptical men that her position was the reasonable one. Furthermore, she continued, producing her father's will. Recently discovered documents prove that Mr. Freeman has been accumulating assets through his own labor and investment. He is not dependent on ranch income, but chooses to invest in our partnership because he believes in its long-term potential. Judge Morrison studied the will with increasing interest, his eyebrows rising as he read the details of Thomas Burke's arrangement with Silas. This is extraordinary, the judge said finally. Mr. Freeman, you were never legally enslaved? No, Your Honor, Silas replied, his voice clear and confident. My status was a legal fiction maintained for protection during dangerous times. I have been a free man working for agreed wages since 1859. Eleanor watched the judge's expression change as he understood the implications. This wasn't a story of a former slave being given charity by a guilty owner. It was the account of 2 successful business partners combining resources to strengthen an already profitable operation. The settlement terms proposed by both parties seem reasonable, Judge Morrison said after reviewing all the documents. Mr. Blackwood, your clients will receive full payment plus interest over 18 months, secured by assets worth considerably more than the debt in question. Miss Burke, you maintain operational control of a business that has proven profitable under your partnership's management. Eleanor felt her heart racing as the judge prepared to render his decision. Everything they had built together, everything Ruby's future depended on, would be determined by his next words. The new partnership agreement lay on Judge Morrison's desk, its legal language transforming 20 years of unequal relationship into something revolutionary for 1886 New Mexico territory. Eleanor watched the judge's pen move across the signature page, making their arrangement official in the eyes of territorial law. By the authority vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, Judge Morrison announced, I hereby approve the settlement agreement between Denver Mercantile Bank and the partnership of Burke and Freeman. The court finds the proposed payment schedule reasonable and the collateral sufficient to secure the obligation. Eleanor felt Silas's and briefly touch her shoulder, a gesture of support that spoke volumes about how far they had traveled from the relationship they once knew. Equal partners now, bound by law and mutual respect rather than the artificial hierarchies of the past. Furthermore, the judge continued, the court takes note of the exceptional stewardship demonstrated by the Burke-Freeman partnership. The ranch operation shows all the hallmarks of responsible management and community investment that this territory seeks to encourage. Blackwood's expression had grown increasingly sour as the proceeding turned against him. "Your Honor," he interjected, "while we accept the settlement terms, we maintain that closer supervision." "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Morrison interrupted firmly, "the court has reviewed extensive documentation proving the defendant's financial stability and business competence. Further supervision would be an unnecessary burden on territorial resources and an unwarranted intrusion on successful local enterprise." Eleanor bit back a smile as she realized what was happening. The judge wasn't just approving their settlement, he was sending a message to outside creditors that New Mexico would protect its successful residents from harassment by distant financial institutions. The Burke-Freeman partnership has demonstrated exactly the kind of local investment and long-term stability that builds territories into states, Judge Morrison continued. "Mr. Freeman, the court is particularly impressed by your financial stewardship during Miss Burke's absence. Such dedication to preserving and improving another's property speaks well of your character." "Thank you, Your Honor," Silas replied. "But I wasn't preserving another's property. I was protecting my home and my daughter's future." The simple statement carried more emotional weight than any legal argument. Eleanor saw several people in the courtroom nod with understanding. The idea of a man fighting to protect his family resonated regardless of race or social position. "Indeed," Judge Morrison agreed. "Family obligation is the foundation of all civilized society. The court is pleased to formalize an arrangement that recognizes and protects such fundamental bonds." The judge signed the final document with a flourish, then handed copies to both parties. Eleanor took hers with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear but from the magnitude of what they had accomplished. "The settlement payments will begin in 30 days, Judge Morrison announced. "The first payment of $234 will be due monthly thereafter until the obligation is satisfied. Court costs will be divided equally between the parties." Blackwood gathered his papers with obvious disappointment. He'd come to Santa Fe expecting to intimidate a desperate woman into immediate payment or asset seizure. Instead, he was leaving with a legally binding payment plan that protected the debtors more than the creditors. "This isn't over," Blackwood muttered to Eleanor as they left the courtroom. "Yes, it is," Eleanor replied calmly. "Your bank will receive every penny owed, plus interest over the next 18 months. That's a better outcome than you could have achieved through seizure proceedings that would have taken years and cost thousands in legal fees." Blackwood had no answer to that logic, and Eleanor felt a surge of satisfaction as he and his associates disappeared into the Santa Fe crowd. Outside the courthouse, Silas was waiting with the partnership papers tucked safely in his jacket pocket. The afternoon sun painted the adobe buildings golden, and Eleanor could smell pinon smoke from the cooking fires that dotted the city. "We did it," she said, hardly believing it was true. "We did," Silas agreed. "Equal partners, legally recognized, with 18 months to build something permanent." Eleanor thought about Ruby, waiting at home with Maria, probably pestering the horses and practicing her letters. Her daughter would grow up secure in the knowledge that her home was protected, her future guaranteed by parents who had chosen to work together rather than struggle alone. "There's something I want to do before we head home," Eleanor said, pulling her grandfather's pocket watch from her dress. The gold case caught the sunlight, its engraved surface worn smooth by generations of Burke hands. "What's that?" Silas asked. Eleanor opened the watch, revealing the intricate mechanism that had kept perfect time for over 50 years. Her grandfather had carried it during the Mexican War. Her father had relied on it during the early days of building the ranch, and she had treasured it as a symbol of family legacy. "This belongs to Ruby now," Eleanor said, closing the watch and handing it to Silas. "Not because she's a Burke, but because she's our daughter. Because family isn't about blood or inheritance. It's about the people who choose to love and protect each other." Silas took the watch with reverence, understanding its significance. "She'll treasure it," he said quietly. The way you treasured her, Eleanor replied. The way you treasured everything I was too proud and too foolish to protect myself. They walked toward the stable, where their horses waited. Past vendors selling pottery and woven goods, past families enjoying the warm afternoon. Eleanor felt a sense of completeness she had never experienced before. Not the hollow satisfaction of a successful business deal, but the deep contentment that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Partners, Silas said, as they mounted their horses for the ride home. Partners, Eleanor agreed. In everything. The ride back to the ranch took them through familiar country. Rolling hills, dotted with juniper and pinon, crossed by streams that ran clear and cold even in the dry season. This was Burke land, Eleanor reflected, but it was also Freeman land now. It belonged to all of them equally, Eleanor and Silas, Ruby and Maria, everyone who had chosen to make it home. As they crested the final hill, before the ranch house came into view, Eleanor saw smoke rising from the chimney and a small figure running toward them across the yard. Ruby had spotted them returning and was racing to meet them, her braids flying behind her like victory banners. Mama, Eleanor. Papa, Ruby called out as they dismounted. Did you win? Are we safe? Eleanor knelt down and pulled her daughter into a fierce hug, breathing in the scent of sunshine and horses that always seemed to cling to Ruby's hair. We won, Eleanor said firmly. We're safe, all of us, together. Ruby pulled back to look at her with serious dark eyes. Forever? Eleanor glanced up at Silas, who was watching them with an expression of perfect contentment. Behind him, Maria had emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron and smiling at their reunion. Forever, Eleanor promised. And for the first time in her life, she understood what that word really meant. The new family portrait sat on the mantel where Silas's freedom papers had once held place of honor. A silver-framed daguerreotype that captured something revolutionary for 1886 New Mexico territory. Eleanor stood between Silas and Ruby, her hand resting on her daughter's shoulder, while Silas's gentle smile suggested a man completely at peace with his place in the world. The photographer in Santa Fe had been initially uncomfortable with the arrangement, but Eleanor's money and determination had overcome his hesitation. 6 months had passed since the courthouse victory, 6 months of learning what it meant to be partners in the truest sense. Eleanor rose each morning to the sound of Ruby's laughter echoing through the house, spent her days working alongside Silas to improve the ranch, and fell asleep each night, secure in the knowledge that they were building something that would last. The partnership had exceeded even their optimistic projections. The spring cattle drive had brought record prices, and they had used the profits to expand the horse breeding operation Silas had been developing. Word was spreading across the territory about the quality of Burke Freeman livestock, and orders were coming in from as far away as Colorado and Texas. The creditors from Denver had received their first 3 payments promptly, and their threatening letters had been replaced by cordial business correspondence, acknowledging the partnership's reliability. Eleanor found herself on the front porch as the sun set behind the mountains, watching Ruby practice her riding in the corral. At 5 years old, her daughter was already showing the natural horsemanship that seemed to run in Burke blood. Though Eleanor had learned that blood mattered far less than the love and patience of good teachers. She's getting ready to ask for her own horse, Silas said, joining Eleanor on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. A real one, not just the pony. Eleanor smiled, accepting the coffee gratefully. The evening ritual of sitting together on the porch had become one of her favorite parts of the day, a time to discuss the ranch's progress, Ruby's development, and their plans for the future. What do you think? Eleanor asked. I think she's ready. Been ready for months, actually. She just needed you here to see it. The words carried layers of meaning that Eleanor was still learning to navigate. Ruby had needed her, not just as a mother figure, but as witness to her achievements, as someone whose approval mattered in the way that only a parent's could. The mare with the white blaze would be perfect for her, Eleanor mused. Gentle but spirited, smart enough to keep her challenged. Daisy, Silas agreed. Ruby's already named her, you know. Been talking to her every morning when she does her chores. Eleanor laughed, recognizing her own childhood habit of naming horses before she was allowed to claim them. Some things, apparently, were inherited regardless of how much time a parent spent away. Speaking of chores, Eleanor said, "Did you see the letter from the territorial capital?" Silas nodded, his expression growing more serious. "About statehood. They want our opinion on the proposed constitution." Eleanor had been surprised when the letter arrived, asking for input from successful ranch partnerships on the subject of New Mexico's eventual transition to statehood. Apparently, their legal victory had brought them to the attention of territorial officials who valued the opinions of established landowners. The Burke-Freeman partnership had become something of a model for successful cooperation between different communities. "What do you think we should tell them?" Eleanor asked. "That statehood should guarantee equal rights for all citizens, regardless of race or origin." Silas replied without hesitation. "That the territory's future depends on recognizing the contributions of everyone who's helped build it." Eleanor felt a surge of pride at his answer. 6 months ago, she would have thought only about how statehood might affect property rights or business regulations. Now she understood that the most important question was what kind of place Ruby would inherit, whether it would be a state that valued justice and opportunity for all its children. "We should write that," Eleanor said, "together. Our first official correspondence as the Burke-Freeman partnership." From the corral came the sound of Ruby calling to them. Excited about something she had accomplished with Daisy, Eleanor and Silas walked over to find their daughter sitting confidently on the mare's back, beaming with pride. "Look, I can do it all by myself now," Ruby announced. "Daisy knows exactly what I want her to do." Eleanor felt her throat tighten with emotion as she watched Ruby guide the horse through a simple pattern, her small hands confident on the reins. This was what she had been missing during those years in Denver. Not just the milestones and achievements, but the daily miracle of watching a child grow into her own person. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Eleanor called out. "You and Daisy make a perfect team." Ruby's smile could have lit up the entire territory. "Papa says partners always work better together than alone." Eleanor glanced at Silas, who was watching Ruby with the expression of a man who had found everything he'd ever wanted in life. "Papa's very wise," Eleanor agreed. The sound of an approaching wagon interrupted their domestic peace. Eleanor shaded her eyes against the setting sun and recognized their neighbor, John Martinez, driving toward the house with what appeared to be his entire family crowded into the wagon bed. "Trouble?" Silas asked, immediately alert. "I don't think so," Eleanor replied, noting the relaxed posture of the approaching family. "Looks like a social call." John Martinez had been one of their first allies when the territorial officials had questioned the ranch's management. A successful sheep rancher whose family had been in New Mexico for 3 generations, he had spoken eloquently about Silas's reputation for fairness and competence in all their business dealings. "Eleanor!" "Silas!" John called out as he pulled up to the house. "We brought news from town." Maria appeared from the house, drawn by the sound of voices, and began helping John's wife and children down from the wagon. The Martinez family had become frequent visitors since the legal proceedings, part of a growing community of neighbors who recognized and respected the Burke-Freeman partnership. "What kind of news?" Eleanor asked, though she was already smiling at the obvious excitement on John's face. "The territorial governor wants to visit," John announced. "He's planning a tour of successful ranches and farms. Wants to show Eastern investors that New Mexico is ready for statehood. Your operation is at the top of his list." Eleanor felt a moment of panic, the territorial governor coming to inspect their ranch, but Silas's calm presence beside her steadied her nerves. "When?" Silas asked practically. "Next month. He'll be traveling with a delegation from Washington, including some railroad executives and potential investors." John's expression grew more serious. "This could be important for all of us. The kind of attention that brings development, railroad connections, better markets for our livestock." Eleanor understood the implications. A successful visit from the territorial governor could establish the Burke-Freeman partnership as a model for the entire territory, opening doors to opportunities they had never imagined. But it also meant their unconventional family arrangement would be scrutinized by powerful men whose opinions could shape New Mexico's future. "We'll be ready," Eleanor said, surprised by how confident she sounded. "I have no doubt," John replied, then smiled at Ruby, who was still sitting proudly on Daisy's back. "That little one will charm them all. Nothing speaks to the future of New Mexico like a child who loves the land and knows how to work with it." As evening settled over the ranch, they gathered in the kitchen for supper, a routine that had become sacred to Eleanor. Maria had prepared Ruby's favorite meal of beef stew and cornbread. But tonight, the conversation was dominated by plans for the governor's visit and what it might mean for their community. "Will there be important ladies coming too?" Ruby asked seriously. "Because if there are, I should probably wear my best dress." Eleanor laughed, delighted by her daughter's natural social instincts. "I'm sure there will be, sweetheart. And yes, we'll all want to look our best. Will they understand about our family?" Ruby continued with the directness of childhood, about how Papa takes care of us and Mama Eleanor owns the ranch together. The question hung in the air, touching on the heart of everything they had built together. Eleanor looked across the table at Silas, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his calm expression. "They'll understand what they see," Silas said gently. "A successful ranch, well-managed cattle, happy horses, and a little girl who knows she's loved. And if they don't approve," Ruby asked, "then they'll learn something about what real success looks like," Eleanor replied firmly. "Because we're not going to pretend to be anything other than what we are, a family." "Mama Eleanor," Ruby said as Maria cleared the dishes, "will you tell me the story about great-grandfather Burke again? But this time tell the true story, the one with Papa in it." Eleanor smiled, settling into her chair with Ruby on her lap. The child loved hearing about her heritage, but she had also learned to distinguish between the simplified version Eleanor used to tell and the more complex truth they now understood. "Well," Eleanor began, "your great-grandfather Thomas Burke came to New Mexico Territory in 1854, with nothing but a wagon, a rifle, and a dream of building something lasting. But he was smart enough to know he couldn't do it alone. So when he met a man named Silas Freeman, who was traveling through the territory looking for honest work and a place to belong, your great-grandfather recognized something special." Ruby settled more comfortably in Eleanor's lap, clearly pleased with this version of the story. Together, they built something bigger than either could have managed alone. They built a ranch where everyone was valued for their contributions, where hard work and loyalty mattered more than the color of someone's skin or the circumstances of their birth. They built a place where families could grow and thrive. Eleanor caught Silas's eye over Ruby's head, seeing the warmth and gratitude in his expression. This was the legacy they were creating together, not just a successful business, but a model for how people could choose to treat each other with dignity and respect. "And that's still what we're building," Eleanor continued. "Every day, with every decision we make, every person we treat fairly, every time we choose love over fear or profit over principle, we're building something that will last long after we're gone." When the story was finished and Ruby had been tucked into bed, Eleanor found herself back on the porch with Silas, looking out over the land they now owned together. The night air carried the scent of sage and the distant sound of cattle settling for the evening. "Are you nervous about the governor's visit?" Eleanor asked. "A little," Silas admitted. "Not about the ranch. I know we can show them something impressive. But about whether they'll accept what we represent." Eleanor nodded, understanding his concern. Their partnership challenged conventional assumptions about race, ownership, and family structure. Some visitors might see their success and be inspired by it. Others might see it as a threat to the established order. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Staying here instead of going somewhere you could have started fresh without the complications of our history?" Silas considered the question seriously before answering. "I did start fresh," he said finally. "Right here. The day you came home and we decided to be honest with each other. The past doesn't define us, Eleanor. What we choose to do with our knowledge of it does. Eleanor felt the truth of his words settle into her bones. She had returned to New Mexico broken and defeated, carrying the weight of her failures like stones in her pockets. But those failures had led her to this moment, to this understanding of what really mattered in life. When I was in Denver, Eleanor said slowly, chasing those investments and trying to build something bigger than the ranch, I thought I was being ambitious. I thought I was honoring my father's legacy by expanding beyond what he had built. Silas waited, understanding that she needed to work through these thoughts aloud. But I was wrong, Eleanor continued. The legacy wasn't the land or the cattle or even the money. It was the idea that people could choose to build something together, that success comes from lifting each other up rather than climbing over each other. Your father understood that, Silas said. Even when the law didn't recognize it, even when society didn't accept it, he chose to treat me as a partner. He planted seeds that we're still harvesting. Above them, stars scattered across the desert sky, like promises of all the tomorrows yet to come. Eleanor Burke had spent 4 years chasing bigger and better opportunities, only to discover that everything she truly wanted had been waiting for her here all along. We should write a letter to Ruby, Eleanor said suddenly, for when she's grown, so she'll understand not just what we built, but why we built it. Silas smiled in the darkness. What would we tell her? That love is stronger than law. That family is what you choose to make it. That the best legacy you can leave is a world where everyone has the chance to belong somewhere. Eleanor thought about the photograph on the mantel, about Ruby's bright future, about the governor's upcoming visit and all the opportunities it might bring. But mostly, she thought about this moment, sitting on her own porch beside her chosen partner, planning for the future of the child they both loved. Eleanor Burke had finally come home, not to the place she had left, but to the place she had chosen to build. And it was exactly where she belonged.